I'm here with Mattias Goldmann from Forest. Hello, Mattias.
Hi.
Could you tell us a little bit about what is Forest as a think tank and what do you work with?
Sure. Forest is the Forum for Reforms, Entrepreneurship and Sustainability. So we work to make sure that sustainable solutions are entrepreneurially driven and make business sense. One way that we do that is that we organize the 2030 Secretariat for Fossil Independent Transport Sector with more than 70 partners from business, including the automotive and the fuel sector, and from municipalities and from the civil society. Well, being half Danish, let me start with Denmark, who have taken a wide perspective to mobility and said, well, fairly often the best thing is to not use the car at all, and Denmark is flat and fairly small, so biking is big there. They're also fairly good at using all the agricultural waste they have to produce mainly biogas. It's also going to be ethanol. They're not as good in using it, so a lot of it is exported, for instance, to Sweden. Now, Norway, our Norwegian friend, are worldwide famous by now for being by far the market with the highest share for electromobility. And that's not only cars, and within cars it's certainly not only Teslas. It's also the buses, the trucks, and now even the ships. And by 2040 domestic aviation is going to be electrified in Norway. The Finns, being a country of large share of forests, are the world leaders when it comes to turning wood into advanced biofuels, mainly ethanol that you can blend into petrol, use as a dedicated fuels. And we Swedes, being sort of in the middle of all that, we are also in this topic in the middle of it. I'd say that we're the mix masters. We have a 2030 target of a fossil independent transport sector that's going to be reached in equal measures by better vehicles, better fuels, and better behavior. So we've got incentives sort of all over, getting inspired by Norwegian and Danish and Finnish colleagues. I think it's a sense of being very small and almost useless when it comes to our own emissions. So if we in Sweden were to reduce our emissions theoretically to zero right now, and nobody noticing, the world would not be able to find out, because we are only 0.15% of the world's total emissions. So the only way for us to make a difference is to inspire others. And the only way to inspire others is to do what others are going to do later, but do it now and do it more across the board and involve the industry better. Part of it, there's a gap. For instance, when Sweden and Finland say that we want to use forestry products for biofuels, in a Central European context, a forest is somewhere where you walk your dog or you run in the morning. It's not something you want to cut down. It's not productive. At least that's not the mentality of the European parliamentarians. So we need to get a better understanding that to maximize the climate benefit of the forest, it has to be a productive forest where we cut down and we plant more. And in fact, the forest cover in Sweden has just been growing, and in Finland as well, over the last decades. Also, when we are inspired by the Norwegians in electromobility, a lot of countries want to do like Norway does, but it's also very easy to say, well, the Norwegians are so damn rich, so there's no way we can copy what they did, which makes it all the more relevant for a still fairly rich but not all that rich country like Sweden or Denmark, if we could show the way in sustainable mobility. It's not either or but both, but we've seen around the world after the Paris Agreement for the climate that also some countries that we might not have initially suspected raised their hand and said, we want to be first movers. So India, for instance, has decided that they want to have a fossil-free transport sector focusing on the passenger cars by 2025. So that's very ambitious, and it's a huge market, and if we can play into that, that's wonderful. China also, mainly because they need to improve air quality in the cities, but the end result is the same. They need to embrace good biofuels, electromobility, and aspects like biking. And then within Europe, we've had a close cooperation with both Germany and the Netherlands, who also work fairly hard with sustainable mobility. It sometimes makes us competitors, but it sometimes also means that together we find a larger market. And we see it's a well-kept secret, but we see that some of the advancements that we've done over the years in Sweden, for instance, in biogas, the world's largest biogas fleet of vehicles is in Sweden. The world's northernmost biogas filling station is in Boden and then Luleå in the north of Sweden. And around the world that's becoming a billion-dollar business now, the Swedish biogas expertise, which is because we created a small but very early market, and then that spreads around the world. There's going to be some tough choices. We cannot, like some environmental NGOs believe, just pick the one that we like the very most, which for instance could be electromobility from wind, or it could be HVO from forest leftovers. That's not going to be nearly enough to meet the target. So we need to be much more efficient, and we need to accept a fairly large variety of different propulsions for our transport fleets. And I'm not very worried about, I'm worried about the discussion, I'm worried about the position of some NGOs, but we see that within a European context, for instance, every year we pay the farmers more to make sure that they don't grow anything because we have such a large surplus. So if they could instead produce sustainable biofuels, that would be great. We also see that every year there's more and more people that eat too much. That's by now a much larger problem than people not having enough food. We also see that years ago there was the food versus fuel discussion. Now the agency responsible for food within the United Nations, the FAO, said food and fuel. Those farmers that produce fuel crops will also get more of a food crop, because you use different parts of the plant, or because you get the money so that you can invest in your farm and get a higher production. Your example of corn was very relevant, because in the United States you get 16 tons of corn per hectare. In Africa you get just 1 ton of corn per hectare, and it's better soil, so it should be at least the same level as the US, but it's very low because there's no investment in farming. And the way to get investment is to finally have a product that's exportable and where you can get cash money from. So the cash crop, which in this case could be biofuels, would get more food in the mouth of the hungry. We had a survey where we asked them, do you feel this is good or bad for business? And a clear majority said that this is a business opportunity. And I hope they can see it that way, because there's going to be large changes when we go from fossil-based petrol and diesel to a larger variety of fuels. And those who understand that are going to be winners. And it's also important to understand that not all the fossil fuels at all, by a large degree, are going to be replaced by electromobility. Because I can understand a lot of retailers feeling a bit worried about electromobility. That's not where they have their forte and where they've done most of their business. But liquid fuels are going to be there for a very long time. They have a very important role to fill in large part of the transport sector where electrification is going to take a long time or may not ever make sense. Shipping, aviation, trucking, buses on the countryside, all those areas, electrification is not going to get there anytime soon. And also, in most of the countries around the world, new car sales amounts to less than 10% of the total vehicle stock. So you need to focus less on those new cars and more on those vehicles. They don't need to be filled with fossil diesel or fossil petrol, but they need to be filled with a diesel or petrol equivalent, and that could mean great business for these people here.